I have just started on my train ride journey to Bonn. It is so hot in here. There's no air conditioning. I don't know if I'm going to be able to sleep. Cheers. I'm sitting outside of my hostel in Bonn waiting for it to open. It's 7 a.m. I barely slept on the train. I just want to go back to bed. So this is my first day in Bonn and it has been pouring all day. I just came off of a tour that was half German, half English. I was literally the only English-speaking person there. It's just one of those travel days. They're not always the most glamorous. I am looking forward to going into Beethoven's house tomorrow and getting to see a little bit more of the city. So this is my second day here, and it is very apparent that Bonn isn't really tourist central. There's still a lot to do and see here. I'm lucky to have much better weather here today. Sunshine! Where were you yesterday? Behind me is the infamous Rhine River, which runs through Germany. Bonn was originally a Roman outpost and was ruled by the Romans for the first 3 centuries. Bonn was the capital of Germany in 1949. Over 80% of the buildings were destroyed here during World War II. Making it look a little bit more modern today. One of their oldest buildings here is the Münster. It's been around for over 1,000 years. Bonn is most famous for its son Ludwig van Beethoven, who was born here in 1770. Beethoven was born to a musical family. His grandfather was a court musician. He tried to impose this on Beethoven's father, who actually ended up being a quite mediocre musician, which might explain why he was so hard on Beethoven. As soon as Beethoven started to show musical promise, his father was quite abusive and would come home in the middle of the night completely drunk and demand that Beethoven play for him. There were a couple of times that his father even locked him in the basement. So given all the abuse that Beethoven went through from his father, you'd think that this would turn him off of music, but it actually just consumed him, and he dedicated everything he had to it. At age 7, he did his first public concert. His father advertised him as 6 years old instead, so it would come off more impressive. At age 10, he actually quit school to completely devote himself to his music. At his first concert was the court musician Christian Neef, and he was so impressed by the young prodigy that he started to tutor him. This was good news for Beethoven because it meant that he no longer had to learn from his abusive father. At 17 years old, Beethoven tried to get out of the convention of classical composition, started writing totally out of this world stuff, and that was kind of his teenage rebellion, his screw the system, I'm gonna write what I want and do whatever I want. So around the time that he was a teenager, Vienna was the music capital of the world. A couple of wealthy investors invested in Beethoven's trek to Vienna, where he had wanted to study since he started playing music. However, 2 weeks after Beethoven moved to Vienna, he had to move back because his mother was ill with tuberculosis. Unfortunately, Beethoven's mother passed away, and he ended up staying in Bonn to become head of the household. He had to consistently take care of his father, whose drunkenness had gotten worse since the death of his wife, and had to take care of his 2 younger brothers as well. This experience turned Beethoven into a bitter, angry man.
You are grumpy.
But he still continued to write beautiful music. While he was taking care of his family, he applied to be a court musician, but the only position that was open was for the viola, which he barely knew, but he learned quite quickly and actually ended up gaining a position as court musician for the viola. So now that Beethoven had a little bit more money, it's all about the skrill, he had more time to compose music. He was known for composing pieces that were too difficult, and his fellow court musicians would refuse to play them. What a bunch of wusses. Beethoven didn't really care that anyone else thought his music was so hard to play. And when his violinist from one of his string quartets came up to him and asked him to rewrite a song because it was too difficult and nearly unplayable, he said, "Do you think I give a damn about your miserable little violin when the muse visits me? Suck it," basically. Beethoven ended up moving back to Vienna and stuck out like a sore thumb in Vienna. All of these aristocratic people with their fancy dresses and their fancy parties and all of their money would gather around a piano where a wild-haired, pock-marked Beethoven would bash out the keys with such aggression that no one in Vienna had ever seen anything like it before. He didn't really care about commissioned work. He would be considered one of the first modern artists who worked for himself. While he would accept contributions, he would always act as though you can pay me money, but you can't buy my music, and was very famous for storming out of rooms. At this point, Beethoven is moody, bitter, and abused. What can come possibly next? Heartbreak. Beethoven was not an attractive man. He had many crushes. Women who were smitten with him usually ended up leaving him to go marry people who were blue-blooded, royals, higher society than Beethoven. He actually fell in love with his best friend's wife. And of course, since he already picked a woman who had been married to his best friend, he was once again heartbroken. But as pretty much any musician, especially Taylor Swift or Adele will tell you, heartbreak is probably the best for writing song material, and this was exactly the same in Beethoven's case. Beethoven loved Napoleon. He actually wrote a piece of music for him. However, Beethoven's fandom quickly died down. He felt betrayed during the conquests. So the piece of music that he had written for Napoleon has Napoleon's name ripped out. He didn't destroy the paper though, because it was still such a beautiful piece of music. But one of the most notable and incredible facts about Beethoven is that in his late 20s he started to lose his hearing. When you're a famous musician, your hearing is pretty important to you. He had to press his ear to his piano to compose his 7th symphony. There's a string of concerts that he played where he couldn't even hear himself playing that were disastrous, so he decided to go directly into composing. Beethoven wrote the very popular 9th Symphony, the first symphony to actually use a chorus. When the symphony premiered, one of the musicians actually had to turn Beethoven around because he couldn't hear the raucous applause. While the entire world would hear the 9th Symphony, Beethoven never actually heard it. Beethoven's 9th Symphony influenced a big part of technology. So Philips and Sony were originally working on a first audio CD standard. Philips wanted an 11.5 centimeter CD, and Sony wanted a 10 centimeter CD. The president of Sony demanded that the CD would be able to hold the entirety of Beethoven's 9th Symphony. The longest recorded version was 74 minutes. It had to have at least 74 minutes of playing time, making it the 12 centimeter piece that it is today. We are all still familiar with Beethoven's works. It seems like every epic human achievement is accompanied by Beethoven's music. The spacecraft that is hurtling through space to the outer edges of our universe has Beethoven's music on it. As the Berlin Wall was coming down, there was a concert of Beethoven's music. But back to Beethoven. So we already know that the guy is a little bit of an outcast, and eventually becomes a vagabond, walking the streets of Vienna wearing the same outfit day after day, not bathing, and being completely trashed the entire time. But then he would go home and write these beautiful songs. Cheers, Beethoven. The man went out epically, was complaining of stomach problems, and his health deteriorated quite quickly. There was a massive thunderstorm. During a large bolt of lightning, Beethoven raised his fist to the sky and without words took his last breath. 20,000 people attended his funeral. In conclusion, Beethoven's a pretty epic guy, and it all started here in Bonn.